And now, it's The Law Show on CL650. A comprehensive look at everything you need to know about the law. Now, here's Sterling Fox.
Good morning and welcome to The Law Show here on CL650. Nice to have you with us. We are joined in studio by a couple of lawyers from MurphyBattista, LLP, a Vancouver personal injury law firm. It's a pleasure to welcome both Scott Stanley and Steve Gibson back to the program. Scott, good morning.
Morning, Sterling.
How are you?
I'm well.
Steve, good morning to you.
Morning, Sterling. Good to be here.
Steve, tell us about yourself. How long have you been with MurphyBattista?
I joined MurphyBattista in 2003. I actually had worked with Scott when I first started out back in 1997 at the same firm, and we came full circle and ended up together a few years ago. But yeah, I've been with MurphyBattista now for 12 years.
All right. And Scott, how long have you been with MurphyBattista?
7.
Okay.
7.
But both of you worked for the other side in your earlier days in your careers, right?
We did. I think everybody that's done this work has worked for ICBC at some point in time.
And other personal insurance, other private insurers as well, right?
Yeah, I after Steve and I were at the firm that we were at when we initially met. I went to another firm. Steve figured things out right away, and he went to go do work for accident victims. I was a bit of a slow study. I had to go work at another insurance firm to make sure I really didn't like it before I made the switch.
But having both of you having experience in playing on the enemy team, so to speak, from the current perspective, must really allow you a lot of insight, especially when you go to court and square off in a big case, as to the mindset that the opposition brings to the case each and every time, Steve.
Yeah, I think you learn a lot about tactics. You learn a lot about the ICBC's internal protocols with file handling. And I think it's actually helped us, we can predict what the next steps are that an insurance company will take, and, we can advise our clients and make sure that, they are following protocols well and pursuing all the right avenues through their claim. And so having that insight, I think, helps us in the long run.
Well, I'm sure it does. And Scott, and you and I have had this discussion on a few occasions here on The Law Show. There's no comparison in the personal satisfaction level at the end of every working day doing what you do now versus what you were doing working for those large monolithic private insurance companies years ago.
Oh, absolutely. I did it for 13 unlucky years, and I think I did it reasonably well. I never lost a trial for them, and I never got one thank you card. And you can do the smallest thing for a regular thinking, loving, caring human, which is the people we work with, and you get I've got bushels of thank you cards, and they're treasures. They're my little trophies. But
wanted to ask you a general question, and then we'll get into some specifics. I was reading or listening actually to a report on the radio news a couple of days ago, and it was about a trial in which a person had been injured, and they sort of gave the very graphic description of the nature of the injury, and then they said something that the plaintiff's lawyer was going to be seeking compensatory and punitive damages in this case. What are compensatory and punitive damages, Scott?
Well, compensatory damages are damages that are meant to replace what you've lost. So in a personal injury claim, if someone's had an injury that's affected their quality of life, you can't give them their health back, so you got to give them money. And if they've lost any wages or they're likely to lose any wages, the money is meant to replace that.
So it's compensation for money that you would have made had you stayed healthy.
That's right.
Okay.
And that compensation is meant to put you back where you would have been had there been no injury. But punitive damages are something entirely different. They're actually intended to penalize the person that injured you in a way that will discourage them from injuring someone else.
Okay. Is that fairly common? Is that a kind of a hand-in-glove thing in every trial? Well, here's your punitive award, and here's your compensatory award.
It's really rare in BC to get punitive damages.
Really?
There's a very high legal threshold to meet in order to get punitive damages.
Okay, and that would be all about fault then, right?
No, because negligence, you can establish negligence, which is fault.
Right.
But going to punitive damages means that someone has caused harm and done it in a way that humiliates the person, or they deserve punishment on top of compensation.
So there would be some intent, perhaps malicious intent involved in some cases then.
Where we might say a person hits somebody at they hit a pedestrian and then they back up and they purposely they hit him initially by accident, and
Right.
then they back up and they run over him again on purpose
To finish the job.
Yeah.
Ouch.
We don't really see that often, but that would be a theoretical situation where you might see punitive damages.
Okay. So again, likely when a trial comes up or a case comes up where a person has been injured, what are you as lawyers looking for when someone comes to Murphy-Battista, Steve, and says, I've been banged up. I'm never going to be the same. I already even though I don't have a great deal of medical evidence to show you yet, I can feel I'm just never going to be the same. How do you take that case? What are you looking for right away?
Okay, the first thing we want to know is we need to know the full life circumstances. We have to understand what the nature of their work is, what the nature of their lifestyle is, what areas are they having physical problems with? Are they having emotional problems? What are their family circumstances? I mean, there's so many factors to consider before we can actually step in and help. And then I think first and foremost, before you even start thinking about money or compensation,
Right.
is we're trying to help people get their health back.
Sure.
And so the initial steps of claims typically are involved with helping to quarterback the care to help them recover. And then, the money and the compensation, that all flows after you help the person recover as best they can. Some people get 100% better.
Mm-hmm.
Others can have lifelong injuries, and the compensation varies depending on their outcome from their injuries.
So this would suggest, Scott, that the sooner you contact a lawyer after a serious incident, the better off it is for all parties.
Well, it's not good for the insurance company for a person to get a lawyer right away, generally speaking, but certainly for the person who's injured, their best interests are served by speaking to a lawyer right away. And if it's a serious case, probably retaining a lawyer right away so that you can start investigating the circumstances of the accident, but also getting in place the resources they're going to need when they're discharged from hospital to get out in the community. You don't want them to be just discharged without any assistance.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think that's pretty... it's pretty key to get a lawyer involved early so those things can be set up.
So if someone is injured, Steve, and is hospitalized, for example, just to follow up on Scott's point, while in the hospital, perhaps that's a good time while there's this lull period, so to speak, while you can't do anything anyway. Maybe that's a good time to source out a lawyer.
It is, and very often, especially in more complicated liability situations, we've heard many cases where people are, hopped up on drugs, medications, they're not even thinking clearly, and insurance companies can send in investigators to take statements from them, start giving evidence that could potentially hurt them down the road. So yeah, it is wise to consult with a lawyer. In fact, I just wanted to add, ICBC, they have quite a large ad campaign and push right now where they're trying to encourage people to avoid speaking to lawyers. They say, trust us, we can settle your claims reasonably and fairly. You don't need a lawyer.
I've seen those ads.
You've seen those
I have
ads,
indeed, yes.
and I think ICBC is growing concerned because the rate of representation has increased, and I think people are starting to realize that having legal advice is not a bad thing. In fact, in the long run, it makes the claims more valuable but more fair, and it is about fairness. It's not about trying to get more money.
Right.
It's about what is actual proper compensation.
So why, and I know, Scott, you'd be the last person to try and represent ICBC in this particular matter, but why do you think they're going forward with not saying avoid lawyers at all costs, because they're not saying that, but they're encouraging us to think around lawyers wherever possible?
Well, I suspect ICBC is concerned because the rate of representation is going up, meaning more people that are injured in accidents are retaining lawyers. But I think that has more to do with the level of service. Like ICBC's really cut a lot out of their ability to service people.
Okay.
And I think 10, 15 years ago, ICBC did a pretty good job of dealing with these minor claims and dealing with people fairly and making sure they were getting their benefits. And they actually do quite a good job dealing with people that have got minor claims where I don't think you need a lawyer. The lawyer will get you just a little enough to pay the lawyer, and that's probably not a good trade for anybody.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what's happened is ICBC's level of service has fallen off, and so people really, they just want to get a lawyer to help them out. And I don't know, maybe ICBC will be able to renew that. It's one thing to make that pitch publicly. I'd like to see them throw some more examiners and employees behind these claims, because they're at the moment, these ICBC employees are massively overworked.
Well, maybe if you're made as a customer, so to speak, to feel that the best you're going to get is take a number and stand in line, we'll get to you as soon as we can, Steve, isn't quite good enough for a lot of people who have been just banged up in an accident and go, hey, what about me over here? And they just don't, they're not ready for you yet. They can't take you.
I think, and Scott touched on this briefly, that, I mean, the adjusters that we deal with, I mean, we deal with sort of a specialized unit within ICBC with our firm.
Okay.
They're basically aligned to work with us. So we deal with these adjusters day in, day out, and they're very good. They're very good people to work with. But many of the claims just that are floating out there in the front end claim centers when people go in off the street, yes, they don't get the attention. I mean, very often you're dealing with teams of adjusters. You don't even get a name of someone that you're dealing with.
Right.
And so, you know, the benefit that we have of dealing with the same adjusters day in, day out is we know their nuances, they know ours,
right.
But you develop a relationship.
You know them as people.
Yes,
right,
yes.
Right.
And I mean, they do take their job seriously, and they are generally more sophisticated examiners that we deal with. And I think at the end, that works for our clients' benefits.
Yeah, I mean, I want to be very clear to all the listeners. Everybody that's involved in an accident should talk to a lawyer first to make sure they need to determine whether or not they need one. Everybody should talk to a lawyer. Our firm, every firm out there does free consultations.
Right.
You can get some free legal advice, and you can make a decision about whether or not you need to hire a lawyer. The problem is that when you phone a lawyer, I think a lot of times their expectation is that you're going to hire them, and you kind of get the big sell, and they might even vilify ICBC and tell you why they need to hire you. You know, you don't need to hire a lawyer, in my opinion, if you've had a minor injury, liability is clearly not at fault, and you're within 6 months or 3 to 6 months of being injured.
Sure.
Because most people, a lot of them get better. And if you get better, you don't, as it turns out, that's a case where you didn't need a lawyer. So I always encourage people to wait, try to deal with ICBC on your own. If you're not better after 6 months, hire us. Now, if a client phones us right away and liability is going to be in dispute, or there's a serious injury, or there's a potentially controversial injury like a concussion, well, they need to hire a lawyer right away. You wouldn't want to have ICBC looking out after those claims. But I think minor claims, I think it makes sense to try to deal with ICBC for the first 3 to 6 months.
Oh, really? Okay.
One benefit of retaining counsel early on is that ICBC cannot access medical records immediately. We can order them ourselves and vet them to keep people's privacy.
I'm glad you brought that up, Steve, because Scott's mentioned this in the past as well, because when you go to ICBC to the claim center, they'll give you a few forms to sign. And, you know, tick this box, and sign a date on the bottom, and we need that right now. And, you know, so you sign. You want to get this thing done. And in many cases, you're signing away permission for ICBC to investigate your medical records and go well into your history that may, Scott, have absolutely nothing to do with the circumstances you're showed up for in the first place.
You are. When you go into ICBC on your own and you sign these authorizations, you're giving them sort of a broad ability to investigate your claim. Now,
exactly.
My experience with ICBC is that they don't abuse that.
Okay.
You know, they seem to be fairly measured in what they do. I mean, they probably will go a little further than I would like, but I don't see any significant abuses, and I haven't seen anything in maybe 10, 15 years.
Okay.
So I don't think people should be alarmed at going in and signing these forms with ICBC. I think they're a good corporate citizen. They act responsibly. I mean, you have to understand that our system of tort compensation is the best in North America. And that's in part because ICBC is such a well-run, ethical company to deal with. I don't always agree with them. They certainly don't always agree with me. But that doesn't mean they're not a good corporate citizen.
It is interesting, friends, when our friends from Murphy-Battista show up on the Law Show, we know that these are hired guns who go to court and represent banged up British Columbians to the tune of a lot of successful cases and big dough, and the enemy is usually ICBC. And yet, all of your colleagues, Scott, including yourself, are very complimentary of ICBC, and very respectful of them as an organization, because even though they are the opponent in your particular case against your client, ultimately, as an insurer, they're pretty darn good at what they do.
I don't think there's not one British Columbian who, if they knew what I knew, you wouldn't want to have a private system of insurance. What I like about ICBC is they'll either pay you or they'll go to trial with you quickly and efficiently, where I find private insurance companies, they will, going to trial for them is like a tanning bed to a vampire. They just hate it. But sometimes there's no other way to resolve a claim other than to get it to trial, and they will just wage a war of attrition and delay and try to nibble and nag at you to settle. This claim is not going to settle. It must go to trial. Let's at least do that. ICBC will do that without any hesitation.
Interesting.
Actually, I find it with private insurers, in other provinces, just getting records from those private insurers is difficult. At least ICBC, when we do report claims, they actually will share the documentation that they have accumulated on that injured person before we became retained. I mean, they actually share information like they should.
And every once in a while, when there's a misstep, you bring it to their attention. They take it very seriously.
Oh, okay.
They're good corporate citizens, in my opinion.
Interesting stuff. These are the opponents of ICBC demonstrating an exceptional degree of respect. I am impressed and always am impressed when you show up. Our guests are from Murphy-Battista, LLP, Vancouver personal injury lawyers downtown at 650 West Georgia. And our guests are Steve Gibson and Scott Stanley. And we'll be back with lots more here on The Law Show after this quick timeout.
There's more of the show still ahead. This is The Law Show on CL 650.